In the small village of Darnham, whispers told of a shadowy figure prowling the edges of the forest, a being that once was a man. Locals spoke in hushed tones of Irwin Carter, a skilled blacksmith who had vanished years ago under suspicious circumstances. His disappearance had been dismissed as a tragic accident and ill-fated journey into the nearby Black Pine Forest during a storm. Years passed, and while people tried to forget, strange events in the forest stirred memories anew. Sheep, deer, and occasionally, more unfortunate prey would be found in the early dawn, shredded and left in pieces just beyond the trees. At first, the villagers blamed wolves until hunters found odd, massive footprints that seemed more humanoid than animal. One night, a villager named Clara ventured into Black Pine with a group, her torch flickering as they searched for the source of the terrifying cries that had echoed through the village. But the further they walked, the louder the silence grew, as if the forest itself were watching. Then they saw him or what he had become. A hulking figure stood under the blood-red moonlight, fur glistening, eyes sharp with both familiarity and a seething rage. The creature resembled Irwin, though his human form had been distorted beyond recognition. His snarls echoed, a mixture of pain and fury, as he locked eyes with the group. Clara felt the hair on her neck stand as she recognized something in his gaze, an old, unyielding sorrow. It was as though Irwin was pleading, trapped beneath the beast, desperate for release yet unwilling to leave the mortal world. The villagers fled, but Clara lingered, watching as the werewolf's figure receded into the darkness, its mournful howl fading into the night. She couldn't shake the feeling that Irwin's transformation was no accident, that there was a dark secret at the heart of his cursed one, perhaps buried deep within the village's own history. Determined to uncover the truth, Clara returned home, her thoughts clouded with dread and questions. But as she sifted through her family's old records that night, she stumbled upon an ancient, handwritten letter from her great-grandmother. Its words spoke of an ancient ritual, one that required a soul bound to darkness to protect the village from the unseen horrors of Black Pine. And there, Clara read the final line, her blood running cold as she realized the terrible bargain Irwin might have made, or the bargain someone had forced upon him. The wind howled outside her window, and in the distance, a lone wolf cried out a plea, a warning, and perhaps a promise. Clara's hands trembled as she finished reading the letter, the ink faded yet still legible, a stark reminder of the shadows that clung to her family's past. It spoke of an agreement one forged generations ago by desperate villagers, who had been plagued by something far worse than wolves. An ancient evil, lurking in the depths of Black Pine, had demanded a sacrifice. A guardian cursed to both guard the village and suffer eternally. Irwin, it seemed, had been chosen not by fate, but by design. She read on, unable to look away from the chilling words describing the ritual. Her ancestor had bound Irwin to the darkness in exchange for the village's safety, tying his very soul to the forest, shackling him to a never-ending existence as both man and beast. Her great-grandmother's letter expressed remorse, hinting that Irwin hadn't been the first nor would he be the last. A sudden noise pulled Clara from her thoughts. The old wooden floors creaked, and she looked up to see shadows shifting outside her window. Her breath caught as she caught a glimpse of a dark shape prowling beneath the moonlight, watching her. The figure slipped into the darkness, and she felt an irresistible urge to follow. Perhaps Irwin was trying to communicate, desperate to reveal the truth he'd been forced to carry all these years. Grabbing a lantern, Clara stepped out into the night, drawn toward the forest as if compelled by a force beyond herself. Black Pine loomed before her, its trees twisted and reaching like skeletal hands. She moved deeper, feeling eyes on her from all directions, the darkness pressing in, oppressive and alive. Finally, she reached a clearing, where the air felt thick with an ancient, malevolent energy. In the center stood a large stone, marked with symbols she recognized from her ancestor's letter. And there, at the edge of the clearing, was Irwin, his wolfish figure merging with the shadows, his eyes reflecting a sadness that chilled her. As Clara approached, she heard a voice not his, but something darker, whispering from the depths of the forest. It spoke of a cycle that must continue, a curse bound to blood, with Clara as the next in line to bear the weight of this twisted pact. She felt the weight of eyes watching, unseen things lurking just beyond the trees. Hungry and waiting, Erwin's gaze softened, and in that fleeting moment, he seemed more human than beast. His eyes locked with hers, and she understood the unspoken plea of warning to turn back, to escape the forest's grip. But it was too late. She could feel the curse tightening around her, a binding as ancient as the forest itself, claiming her as it had claimed him. The wind stirred, and a haunting melody filled the air, a song of sorrow and betrayal. Clara felt her heartbeat slow as the whispers grew louder, merging with Erwin's mournful howl. And then, with one last look, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone in the clearing. Her fate entwined with his. The villagers would later say they saw Clara entering Blackpine that night, but none dared to follow. Her home stood empty, her lantern left flickering on the porch, and her name soon became another whispered tale, a warning to those who might wander too close to the forest. Yet, some swore they could still hear her voice in the dead of night, calling out from Blackpine alongside the low, echoing howl of a wolf trapped between two worlds, bound forever to protect, or to haunt. As the villagers whispered about Clara's disappearance, strange occurrences began to plague Darnham. Animals vanished overnight, and children claimed to hear a woman's soft voice calling to them from the edge of Blackpine. Those brave enough to venture close spoke of seeing a flickering lantern deep within the forest, a ghostly light that moved with purpose before vanishing in the shadows. The village council grew anxious, remembering the old tales they had kept buried. They gathered in the church one night, poring over faded records and letters, seeking answers. Among the records, they found a journal from Clara's great-grandmother, a chilling account that recounted how, when she had made the original pact, she had not done so alone. Several other families had been involved, each pledging a member's soul to bind the curse. Together, they had sealed away something ancient and unspeakable. But the curse required constant feeding, a protector to keep the entity at bay. But now, the council members realized the curse had grown restless. Erwin's transformation had merely delayed the inevitable, and with Clara's disappearance, it seemed the curse was beginning to unravel. The markings at the clearing, the stone altar, where Clara had last been seen, had grown over with fresh vines and darkened with strange, iridescent moss. It was as if the forest itself was preparing for something, reclaiming its power. One of the council members, an old man named Father Ewan, argued they should seek out an ancient ritual that could sever the pact once and for all. But this ritual, they discovered, required a sacrifice, a willing soul to enter the forest and face the dark force that lay within. The council grew silent, unwilling to risk anyone from their own families. The curse's hunger, they feared, would only continue to grow. Meanwhile, at the edge of the village, a young boy named Theo had been experiencing vivid dreams. He saw visions of Clara wandering through the forest, her face pale, her hands clawed as if battling something unseen. In each dream, she would reach out to him, whispering his name with a strange urgency. Theo didn't understand the words, but he felt compelled to follow her. One night, against his family's wishes, Theo slipped into Blackpine, clutching a small locket he'd found among Clara's belongings. The forest seemed to part before him, almost as if guiding him toward the altar. The silence was thick, broken only by his shallow breaths and the faint rustle of unseen creatures. At the clearing, he saw her, Clara, but not entirely herself. Her eyes gleamed with a haunting glow, her form shifting between human and something otherworldly. She beckoned him forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Theo, it's up to you now. The forest, it needs someone to break the cycle." Just as he reached her, a dark figure emerged from the shadows. Erwin, his face twisted in a desperate snarl, as if struggling to maintain his humanity. The creature within him had grown stronger, feeding on the power of the curse. His hand extended, warning Theo to stay back, but Clara reached out, her fingers brushing Theo's as she handed him the locket. "Find the heart of Blackpine," she murmured, her voice filled with the sorrow on her ears. "The altar, it holds the key, but it must be bound by blood willingly given." With that, Clara and Erwin vanished into the mist, leaving Theo alone. He clutched the locket tightly, feeling the weight of Clara's last words. As he turned, he noticed the altar beginning to pulse with an eerie light, illuminating symbols he hadn't noticed before, symbols that seemed to call to him. But as he took a step forward, the forest erupted with sounds, growls, whispers, and the sensation of 1,000 unseen eyes watching his every move. He knew now that his journey had just begun, and the secrets he would uncover might reveal truths that would change the village forever, or consume him entirely. The people of Darnham waited anxiously for dawn, watching the edge of Blackpine, hoping Theo would return. But as the first rays of sunlight broke over the village, the forest remained silent, swallowing all trace of him as it had so many before. Days turned into weeks, and the hope that Theo would return faded like mist at dawn. The villagers grew fearful, avoiding Blackpine altogether, and willing to confront the ancient darkness that lurked there. The council members, guilt-ridden yet paralyzed by dread, carried on with their lives, trying to ignore the growing whispers of the curse that had plagued their families for generations. But as winter descended on Darnham, strange phenomena intensified. Shadows moved within the forest, visible even from the village outskirts. In the dead of night, mournful howls echoed through the valley, mingling with soft, sorrowful cries. Clara's voice, Theo's voice calling from within Blackpine. Now bound to the curse they had both tried so desperately to end. One bitterly cold evening, Father Ewan, the last surviving council member, received a message in a dream. He saw Theo, eyes wide with fear yet determined, clutching the locket and standing before the ancient altar, hands stained with his own blood. But the ritual had failed. Instead of breaking the curse, Theo's attempt to free the village had only strengthened the binding. His soul, like Erwin's and Clara's, had been claimed by the dark force at the heart of Blackpine, bound to serve as its eternal guardians. The next morning, Father Ewan ventured to the edge of the forest, compelled by an overwhelming sense of guilt and grief. He was met with silence, save for the occasional rustling of leaves in the cold breeze. As he peered into the woods, a chilling realization settled over him. He saw, just beyond the first line of trees, 3 faint, spectral figures watching him. Erwin, Clara, and Theo, each with eyes that glowed faintly, their faces etched with sorrow. With one last look, Father Ewan stumbled back, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had helped set in motion so many years ago. The forest had taken everything from them young lives, souls bound in a never-ending cycle of suffering, and it would continue to do so long as the pact remained unbroken. Darnham fell silent, haunted by memories and the knowledge of what lay within Blackpine's depths. The village's children grew up with warnings never to enter the forest, and they, in turn, would pass these tales to their own children, the legacy of fear persisting through each generation. And every so often, when the wind was right and the moon hung high in the sky, the villagers could hear it, the voices of the lost, mingling with the howls of a wolf. Erwin, Clara, and Theo, bound by the ancient pact, forever haunting the village they had tried to protect, unable to escape the forest's cruel grip.